In a world where genetic modification had transcended from science fiction into everyday reality, Lucas Stone had once been an idealist, a believer in the power of technology to better humanity. He'd been among the first in the wave of enhanced, choosing to make minor adjustments to his genome, a tweak here, a nudge there, just enough to sharpen his reflexes, quicken his mind, and enhance his endurance. He was no Superman, but he'd felt the subtle power in his veins, a satisfaction that he was equipped to make a difference. But the world around him had shifted. What had once been seen as a miraculous advancement was now synonymous with division. The enhanced walked taller, faster, and more confidently, leaving the ordinary, the unmodified, to trail in their shadow. Lucas, still loyal to his ethics, had chosen to use his skills to protect those without genetic advantages. Now, he worked as an investigator, tracking rogue enhanced who abused their powers, enforcing a delicate balance between ordinary citizens and the genetically modified. Lucas's latest assignment brought him into the shadowy part of the city, where neon lights flickered above narrow streets crowded with alleys and crumbling brick buildings. The enhanced had pushed their way into all walks of life, some of them taking jobs that required a certain level of ability, positions as rescue workers, athletes, and even high-level consultants. But others had used their genetic upgrades for far more dangerous purposes. That night, Lucas was hunting one of the latter. A report had come in that a group of enhanced had taken over a block, terrorizing anyone who dared cross them. Lucas strode through the murky streets, senses sharpened, picking up the faintest traces of movement and sound, an ability that had saved him more than once. At the heart of the district, he encountered the perpetrators, 3 enhanced individuals huddled in a tight circle, the edges of their bodies flickering with unnatural energy. The leader, a hulking figure with arms like iron rods, spotted Lucas and smirked. Well, what's this? A lone wolf, the leader sneered, flexing his genetically modified muscles. Think you can take us on? Lucas held his ground, assessing their strength. Enhanced abilities varied widely, often unpredictable. He took a breath, centering himself, and then sprang into action, his body a precise, honed instrument of force. Within moments, he'd subdued the leader, his strength calibrated perfectly to hold him without causing permanent damage. But as he tightened his grip, he sensed something unusual. The man's power didn't seem random or chaotic, as most genetic modifications were. Instead, there was a refined quality to it, as though his abilities had been sculpted, crafted with intention. As the police arrived to secure the scene, Lucas began piecing together what he'd noticed. This wasn't just a rogue gang causing trouble, there was something deeper, a chilling purpose behind these enhancements. And that night, as he lay awake, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at the tip of an iceberg. In the days that followed, Lucas dived into his investigation. He started digging through records, tracking connections, and following leads. His suspicions led him to an abandoned research facility, an old shell of a place, with yellowing documents and broken test tubes littering the dusty floors. But in the piles of papers, he found something, a logo, a small triangle entwined with a DNA strand, emblazoned on a crumbling page. Beneath it, a single word, Genesis. Genesis was more than a company or a project, it was a name whispered among those who dared question the origins of the enhanced. Rumor had it that Genesis was not merely providing genetic upgrades but that they harbored ambitions to shape the future of humanity. The more Lucas uncovered, the clearer it became, Genesis wasn't just altering genes. They were steering the very direction of human evolution. A few days later, Lucas's investigation took a new turn. He received a message from an anonymous source, with a location and a single line, "Meet me if you want to know the truth." Despite the risks, Lucas followed the lead, arriving at a dimly lit, underground bar. His contact, a woman cloaked in shadows, introduced herself as Jenna Morris, a former scientist who had worked within Genesis. Jenna's voice was shaky, her eyes haunted. She explained the scope of Genesis's ambition. The organization had been carefully crafting genetic modifications, not as a mere enhancement but as a tool for control. They were developing new genomes, meticulously selecting traits and abilities, creating a population that could be loyal to Genesis alone. For years, they'd been implanting subtle upgrades, designing enhanced individuals to be stronger, faster, and most of all, obedient. But why? Lucas demanded, his voice low, his heart pounding. What's the endgame here? Jenna swallowed, her hands clenching around her drink. Genesis wants to build a hierarchy, Lucas. They see humanity as flawed, chaotic, uncontrolled. They think they can save us by creating a new kind of human, one that fits their design. They want to lead us into a future where free will is secondary to survival. Lucas felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he kept it in check. What about those of us who already have enhancements? He asked, his voice tense. Are we just pawns in their game? Jenna nodded solemnly. Some of you were chosen for specific traits. Others, you're collateral. Their experiments went out of control sometimes, and they lost track of which individuals carried which modifications. But there are enhanced individuals out there, like you, Lucas, who still retain their free will. And that's what Genesis fears most. Jenna handed Lucas a small drive, filled with files and documents detailing Genesis's plans and methods. It was enough evidence to expose their conspiracy, but it was also a window into the true horror of their ambitions. The files contained detailed profiles of enhanced individuals, each with notes on how to activate dormant abilities through a device called the Genome Controller, a piece of technology Genesis had developed to awaken genetic codes at their command. Lucas left the meeting, his mind reeling. He knew what he had to do. Genesis couldn't be allowed to move forward with their plans. Armed with the information Jenna had given him, he began recruiting other enhanced individuals who shared his ethical concerns. Among them were people who'd once been law-abiding citizens, those who'd taken only minor enhancements, and those with high-level modifications who had turned their backs on Genesis. Together, they devised a plan to break into a Genesis facility, targeting the lab that housed the Genome Controller. Lucas understood the stakes. If Genesis unleashed the device, they could manipulate the minds of enhanced individuals globally, enforcing obedience with the push of a button. The implications were terrifying: a world where free will was a memory, where every enhanced person served as a puppet in Genesis's hands. As they prepared for the assault, Lucas took stock of his small, ragtag team. There was Ryan, a combat-trained enhanced with heightened reflexes and incredible agility; Tessa, a hacker with genetic modifications that improved her cognitive abilities, allowing her to interface with complex systems nearly instinctively; and Mark, a former soldier whose strength was almost superhuman. Each had their reasons for opposing Genesis, each had their scars, their burdens, and their thirst for justice. The night they set out was dark, moonless, casting the city in deep shadows. They moved swiftly, their training and abilities in sync. When they arrived at the Genesis facility, Lucas felt a knot of apprehension settle in his stomach. This was more than just a mission, it was a battle for the soul of humanity. Genesis represented the ultimate perversion of genetic advancement, and they were the only ones standing in the way. They slipped inside, Tessa hacking through security protocols with practiced ease. Lucas could feel the weight of Jenna's warning pressing on him. Genesis had developed enhanced enforcers, genetically modified soldiers who would be relentless, nearly invincible. As they pushed deeper into the facility, they encountered their first obstacle, a group of enhanced guards. The guards were unlike any Lucas had faced before. Their movements were mechanical, precise, lacking the instinctual, erratic reactions that made humans unpredictable. These guards weren't just enhanced, they were controlled. Lucas's team engaged, a rapid and brutal confrontation that left them shaken but victorious. Yet, every step they took felt like wading into a darker, more twisted reality. The guards were merely the first line of defense, and Lucas could sense the presence of something more sinister lying ahead. Finally, they reached the lab where the genome controller was housed. The device sat in the center of the room, a sleek piece of machinery humming with quiet menace. Lucas could almost feel the waves of power radiating from it, a device capable of altering minds, bending wills. But as he stepped forward to dismantle it, an alarm blared, and the door slid open, revealing the figure he'd hoped to avoid, Dr. Evelyn Crane, the mastermind behind Genesis, standing with an air of cold authority. Her gaze was calculating, a twisted pride gleaming in her eyes as she observed Lucas and his team. "Did you really think you could stop us?" she sneered, her voice icy. "This is evolution, Lucas. This is the future." Lucas met her gaze, defiance sparking in his own. "Not if that future means sacrificing everything that makes us human." Lucas held his ground, eyes locked on Dr. Evelyn Crane. The hum of the genome controller pulsed in the room, a heartbeat of raw power, ready to enslave thousands of enhanced if it fell into the wrong hands, or, rather, if it remained in hers. "Evolution isn't forced," he said, his voice steady. "It's natural, unpredictable. That's what makes humanity worth fighting for." Crane's lips twisted into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold ambition. "Unpredictability is exactly the problem," she replied, crossing her arms. "For too long, humanity has staggered forward, driven by impulse and weakness. The genome controller is our chance to remove chaos from the equation. Imagine a world where everyone fulfills their potential, guided by a purpose that transcends selfish desires." As she spoke, enhanced enforcers flooded into the room, forming a protective barrier around her. They stood with military precision, their eyes glazed with a mindless obedience that sent a chill down Lucas's spine. These weren't merely soldiers, they were products, extensions of Crane's ambition. Tessa, her fingers twitching, shifted closer to Lucas. "What now?" she whispered, her gaze darting to the enforcers, each one standing like a human wall of raw, controlled power. Lucas tightened his grip on his weapon, a custom-modified tranquilizer gun designed to subdue enhanced without fatal injuries. "We stick to the plan," he murmured back, his voice barely audible. With a swift hand signal, Lucas directed his team to spread out, positioning themselves for an attack. The enforcers were highly trained, genetically optimized for combat, but Lucas's team had one advantage: freedom. Where the enforcers moved with mechanical precision, his team operated with a fluid unpredictability born from personal choice, an instinct Genesis couldn't program out of them. Dr. Crane seemed to sense the impending clash and raised a hand. "Lucas, think carefully before you act. You're talented, strong, and you care about people. Genesis could offer you a place in this new order, a chance to shape humanity's future with us. Join us, and you'll have a purpose greater than yourself." Her words lingered, tempting in their promise of power and control. Lucas took a deep breath, his mind racing through everything he'd seen, the lives he'd touched, the horrors he'd uncovered. No amount of power was worth the loss of human agency, of the right to choose one's own path. "Sorry, Dr. Crane," he said, his voice ringing with finality. But a future without freedom isn't one I'll fight for. Without waiting for her reaction, Lucas launched himself forward, catching the enforcers off guard. His team followed suit, fanning out as they engaged in a brutal, close-quarters fight. The room exploded into a chaotic flurry of movement, fists and feet flying, as Lucas's team fought with every ounce of strength they had. Lucas ducked beneath a punch, sweeping the legs out from an enforcer and sending him crashing to the floor. Another charged at him, but Tessa was there, her cybernetic reflexes firing as she slammed an elbow into the enforcer's side, temporarily disabling his enhancements. Mark moved like a whirlwind, his superhuman strength allowing him to take on 2 enforcers at once, his fists hammering down like a sledgehammer, yet, for every enforcer they took down, another seemed to take its place. The enforcers moved with relentless efficiency, bound by the genome controller's influence, their minds trapped in Crane's iron grip. Lucas's muscles screamed with exertion as he fought on, his vision blurring, but he couldn't afford to falter. Through the melee, he caught a glimpse of Dr. Crane standing by the genome controller, her expression one of calculated indifference. She watched the fight unfold like a scientist observing an experiment, her fingers poised over a control panel. Lucas's heart raced as he realized what she was about to do. Fall back, he shouted to his team, his voice barely audible over the clamor. Get clear of the controller. But his warning came too late. Crane pressed a button, and the genome controller emitted a low, resonant hum. Lucas felt a strange pressure building in his head, as though a weight were pressing down on his mind. For a moment, his movements felt sluggish, as though something were pulling him back, urging him to yield. But he gritted his teeth, fighting against the invisible force, focusing every fiber of his being on resisting the pull. This was Genesis's ultimate weapon, an override command that could suppress the will of any enhanced individual within range. But Lucas's enhancements had always been mild, the modifications less intrusive, and he clung to that fragment of freedom like a lifeline. Through sheer force of will, he broke free, shaking off the controller's influence. He looked around, his heart sinking as he saw some of his teammates faltering, their eyes dulling as they succumbed to the controller's control. Lucas, Tessa's voice was strained, her body trembling as she fought to resist. You have to stop her. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. Hold on, Tessa. I'll end this. Ignoring the enforcers, Lucas charged straight toward Dr. Crane, adrenaline surging through him as he closed the distance. Crane's eyes widened in surprise as he barreled toward her, a force of raw determination. At the last second, she sidestepped, her hand reaching for a stun weapon, but Lucas was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it sharply, forcing her to drop the device. She let out a gasp of pain, but her eyes blazed with defiance. You're a fool, Lucas, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. Without us, humanity is doomed to destroy itself. You think you're protecting them, but you're only delaying the inevitable. Lucas held her gaze, his jaw set. I'd rather give them a chance to choose their own fate than force them into yours. In one swift motion, he turned her around, using her as a human shield as he reached for the control panel. His fingers flew across the controls, his years of training guiding him as he searched for the controller's shutdown sequence, but Crane was a step ahead. She twisted in his grip, slamming her elbow into his side, forcing him to stumble. She broke free, her eyes blazing with fury. If I can't have this world, neither will you. She lunged toward the control panel, her hand reaching for a lever that would activate the controller at full power, a final, desperate attempt to seize control of every enhanced in the city. But Lucas reacted instinctively, diving forward and grabbing her arm, pulling her back with all his strength. They grappled in a deadly struggle, each vying for control of the lever. The genome controller's hum grew louder, vibrating with a dangerous energy that threatened to spiral out of control. Lucas felt his strength waning, his body battered and bruised, but he couldn't let Crane win. With a final surge of determination, he wrenched the lever away from her grasp, twisting it downward, disengaging the controller. The machine's hum faded, the oppressive pressure lifting from his mind. Doctor. Crane staggered back, her face pale with shock. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You don't understand what you've done. Humanity will spiral into chaos without us. Lucas took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. Humanity deserves the right to make its own mistakes. Crane opened her mouth to reply, but the words died on her lips. The door burst open, and a team of law enforcement officers stormed in, alerted by the commotion and ready to take down anyone left standing. Lucas's team, weakened but free from the controller's influence, stood in silence, watching as Crane was taken into custody, her ambitions shattered. As the officers secured the room, Lucas exchanged weary glances with his team. They had won, but the cost was evident in the bruises and exhaustion etched into their faces. The genome controller lay dormant, its power neutralized, but the threat it represented lingered in Lucas's mind. He knew that Genesis wouldn't be the last organization to try to manipulate humanity's future. But for now, he'd struck a blow for freedom, a stand against those who sought to control what it meant to be human. In the quiet aftermath, Tessa approached him, her expression solemn. "Do you think they'll try again?" Lucas nodded, his eyes distant. "Probably. But as long as there are people willing to fight, there's hope. We may be enhanced, but that doesn't mean we're any less human." Together, they left the Genesis facility, stepping into the crisp night air, the weight of their actions settling on their shoulders. The world beyond was uncertain, unpredictable, but for Lucas, that was exactly what made it worth fighting for.